So we can talk more about that towards the end about where you're believing now. But so it sounds like, and I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't imagine what that would be like. We had some miscarriages, but not a stillborn. I think that's a whole nother level of difficulty and tragedy. So I'm so sorry. And
thank you.
So it sounds like that kind of put the discussion or even the pursuit of questioning on pause for some time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think
although
communication wise, right? I was still wrestling with these problems by myself.
Actually, so it was October 20th of 2015 that we lost our baby. And it was just shortly, not even a month later, they came out with a stance on the LGBTQ issues. So I think that
the November 2015
yeah, I think
policy.
that kind of caused an uproar in our our questions.
Well, I think, and I didn't mention this before, but one of the things that got me thinking about religion in general, and this fact that there's one true church, or the idea that there's one true church, is that, and I don't personally, I mean, other than a couple people in, in the family, in our family that are either lesbian or gay, I didn't know personally, but I did see people that were committing suicide. I saw families that were ruined over it. And, if you believe in the God that the church teaches, a loving God, someone who knows you as an individual, it never made sense to me why God would make someone lesbian or gay and then tell them that they can't act on it.
And who is that? And who's to decide?
And who's to decide that? And even before I questioned the church, that was a problem before my mission. I felt that way before my mission. And I would ask people about it, and they would say, well, that's just their trial they've been given. I'm like, no, that does not make sense to me in any ways. They're like, it's like alcoholism. No, it's not. And so that was always kind of an underlying issue for me. And I remember watching news, and it was on Facebook. Brooke goes, hey, the church just announced a policy that if a kid is in a home with lesbian parents or gay parents, they can't be baptized until they're 18. And I'm like, don't believe everything you read on Facebook. That's what I said, because I thought in my mind, there's no way.
And I'm like, this is real. This is happening.
I was like, there's no way they would say that, right? Openly. There's no way that they would come out with that policy. And sure enough, it was real. And that was another thing that was just a blow to me, that I thought, wow, okay, this is, if you're going to keep driving the wedge between me and the church, this is another big one that they just threw in there. And my personal beliefs morally and what the church believes.
What was that policy like for you?
Well, okay, so the next morning, I was actually quite offended because, like I said, they're like my sisters to me, my twin cousins. One of them's bisexual and one of them is lesbian, and she's married to a wonderful person we just love. And I don't know if Jesse's on here or if she's listening, but anyways, so for me, that kind of hits home because a person's heart at best. You understand that everyone's trying to navigate this life to the best of their ability, and life is hard enough. Why add on to those afflictions and make them feel more guilty than they already feel with how they've been born or how they've been raised? It's like telling somebody who's born without an arm, that they should be ashamed that they weren't born with an arm, and that no, they can't have a prosthetic arm to validate or to help them, so that they can have two arms and they can function properly. You know what I mean? So it's like, how can you sit there and tell someone that was born paralyzed or paraplegic that they can't have a wheelchair? I mean, who? And
not even that they're flawed physically, but spiritually.
Spiritually, right? Yeah. I mean,
they're not
just because it's not a mental flaw that you can, or a physical flaw that you can see from your own eyes, doesn't mean it's not there. And I just feel like there's a lot of issues here on this earth. It's not for us to judge. And I strongly believe that that's one of the issues that's not for us to judge. So the next following morning, we wake up and there's this family text message string that we get. And my brother attaches the article about the issue, and he says, what do you guys think about this? So I have people chiming in my family, and one of my brothers chimes in and says, what's to think about? The prophet said it, so we just go with what the prophet says. We don't question it. And so then I replied to that, and I said, so if the prophet told you to jump off a cliff, would you do that too? And it was kind of just like ... like, let's just not go into this. This is a touchy subject, you know?
Yeah, we have family that had a close relationship with their boss, which was lesbian. And for me at the time, again, my concept was, well, if you're two lesbian parents, why would you want to raise your kid in the church anyways? Why would you want them to be baptized? And so this whole journey has brought to me a spectrum of believers, right? Like I used to think it was black and white, you believe it or you don't. And this kind of plays into later in our conversation with Spencer on the way people perceive things. But, you know, she went on to say that this person grew up in the church. She loved the church, but she knew she was lesbian and she was going to be a lesbian. But she wanted their child to be part of the church because she felt like it was a good upbringing and a good support system. And she hoped that her kid didn't have to face the same problems she did being lesbian. And so she wanted to raise her in the church and she wanted her to be baptized. But that policy came out and she had to take a side, right? There was no more of this neutral ground where we love everyone. But you know, it was more of a, well, if you're going to be this way, then we don't want you here. And so it opened my eyes to this group of people that grew up in the church, have an emotional tie with the church, but they may not believe in its doctrine, but they still want to participate in it for whatever reason, good youth program, whatever it may be. So, you know, I just think, again, that was one more thing for me personally that was just like, I think when that hit, I really started to dive in. Mm-hmm. That's at the point where I was like, okay, I'm not going to wait for information to come to me. I'm going to start doing my research because I'm really struggling.
So now we get a year and a half later, we get pregnant with our fourth child. And of course, like, I'm sick. I'm not as sick as I was with our last one. I'm still having the medical intervention that I had before, but it's not to the degree that I had before or the extent. But I'm having some health issues, and I go to a couple doctors. And I actually had been having these health issues for probably years prior to. And I had been kind of aligned with the word of wisdom with the health issues I was having, to not go into too much detail. And so, I mean, these health issues probably go back into prior to when we were married. But then I didn't decide to actually do something about it until after Cohen was born, because they were just getting worse. So at this point, I was trying other healthy alternatives like green tea extract or teas of certain sorts, or vitamins, all sorts of you name it, I tried it. And so as I continue to go to specialists and doctors, multiple doctors on several occasions had told me, you need to drink coffee. You need to drink black coffee. This is going to benefit you in so many ways. You are an ideal candidate to drink black coffee. So of course this adds on to my shelf, and I'm feeling so much guilt at this point in time because I'm thinking, why? Why would they tell me to drink black coffee? It's so bad for you. I've always been taught that it's horrible for you. So, I'm just kind of talking to my family about it, and every one of them is like, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Do you think I haven't tried this? Do you think I haven't tried that? I've tried everything. I've been dealing with this for 10 years. I've tried to incorporate certain foods into my diet, and I'm actually a very healthy eater. So for me, if it hasn't worked yet, it's not going to work. So I start researching black coffee. I start finding all these amazing benefits about it, how wonderful it is for you, and how it lowers the risk of heart disease, and how it just, it can help you. It's a natural diuretic, and just lots of things about coffee that could benefit me, especially whereas I'm a mom and I'm not getting any sleep. There's the added perks of caffeine. And so I'm skeptical about this, and I really don't want to drink it because it's against the word of wisdom. And I'm trying to navigate where my feelings are on the stance of coffee and the word of wisdom are now. So that's where I think things start to kind of escalate.
Yeah, and I think one other thing that was important that we didn't know, that around the November 2015 time is when I stopped wearing my garments. And for Brooke, it was like a big blow. It was kind of like, why are you doing this? You know, is there something else you're not telling me? You know, and I didn't feel right about it. I didn't feel like I believed in the church anymore. I felt like I was kind of done. And and not that I had vocalized that. It was just kind of this one thing that was unsaid. I didn't want to go to church ever. And I had a calling. I would go to my calling, and then I would go back home. And at that point, it was, so it went on for a while, probably about a year.
But he had not dove. He hasn't gone down the rabbit hole at this point.
Yeah, I wasn't looking at like Mormon Think or CS Letter or any of that stuff yet. But I felt with all these different issues that I just didn't align with the church anymore. And so that was a struggle in our marriage for a while, where she thought, again, going back to the way she's been taught her whole life is, well, your husband's doing something he shouldn't be doing.
And I continued to wear my garments, and I continued to go to my callings, and I was in Young Women's. And at this point, I'm thinking, well, it's got to be true, because my patriarchal blessing talks about me in Young Women's, and I'm in Young Women's. And so, I'm thinking,
it's pretty general.
Still wear my garments, still keep pulling the wagon. I'm pulling the wagon still. So,
yeah. And so, about the, mid 2015, I started getting into 16. Yeah.
It was
after the policy.
Yes.
Sorry, 16. Yes, thank you. So it's actually before that. So beginning of 2016, really. And I started getting into, I read the CS Letter. And those were some of those things I'd heard. A lot of them I had not heard.
It was 2017 because we had Navy.
No. I told you that we were leaving, that I was done before Navy was born.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
So beginning of 2016. And anyway, so I would stay up till 2 a.m, just in bed on my phone, reading everything I possibly could consume. And I would read Mormon Think, and I would read Fair Mormon. I wanted to give both sides a fair shot. I was at no means trying to find a way out. I just thought, this stuff is amazing. And then, the biggest thing for me that really was just like, okay, this is ridiculous, was the Book of Abraham. The facsimiles, and that it was a copy from funerary text, and that it was a identical drawing, but the parts that was missing, you could tell he just penciled in. There were just things that just continued to add up. And I remember one night sitting there, this was in March of 2016. I remember sitting there at night at 2 a.m, and it was like the clouds departed. There were blue skies. I had an epiphany. I had an aha moment, and you can even call it a spiritual moment, is the minute I had allowed myself to believe that the church, or an option at least, that the church was not true, everything made complete sense. I no longer wrestled with these issues of polygamy, of Joseph Smith, of the Book of Abraham, of the witnesses leaving the church, Emma leaving the church. All of this stuff was like, well, duh, Josh, it's made up. It's the religion. It's not true. It's not real. None of this stuff, it makes perfect sense now that it's not true. It was no more, how do I make these issues, these problems, pan out in my brain? How do I rationalize them? How do I fit them into my logic? And they just don't fit, right? It just didn't compute. But once I realized that I was trying to fit it, a square peg into a round hole, it dawned on me that I was doing it wrong. I was thinking about it wrong. And that was the night that I was like, okay, I'm done. I can't. Because for a long time, even though I had doubts, I thought, well, maybe I raised my kids in it. Maybe, I just deal with it. And, my kids ask questions, be honest with them about it. But then at the end of the day, I thought, I can't. I don't believe in Joseph Smith. The things that he's done to me now are atrocious. The way I view him today is that he was an intelligent person, very different, very opposite of what the church paints, that he wasn't just some dumb young kid. He was a smart, entrepreneurial person that was hungry.
He didn't collaborate the scriptures at 14 years old. It was more like 20.
Yeah, that he was very well aware that this route was going to gain him money, power, and influence, and that's the route he took. And, all of this stuff made sense to me.
He had multiple accounts of the first vision, not just one. Just
yeah,
little
and
things like that.
And that time, I even listened to. That's when I found Mormon Stories, which for me was an absolute lifesaver. It helped me understand that there were sincere, honest, intelligent people out there that were going through the same thing. Because at that time, I still felt like I was a sinner. Maybe I'd lost the spirit somewhere. Like the temple ordinances, right? I don't know about anybody else, but I never once went to the temple and thought, oh, this is amazing. I remember going there and being like, it's a quiet place. I can ponder, I can think. But it wasn't, to me, I was like, maybe in my mind, I was like, well, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe it's the Diet Coke. I don't know. I'm not feeling the spirit. And, but all that made sense once I realized the church wasn't true. And, I think it was Nikki and Lance's podcast, the couple where they come on and they talk about their transition. And it was eye-opening for me. It was refreshing. I listened to Tom Phillips' podcast. That one blew my mind, that he had met with Jeffrey R. Holland, because and something I did not mention as part of my struggles is I actually went to the bishop. I did go to the bishop for a full year.
Like numerous occasions.
Numerous times, and was pretty honest with him.
Of course, from a wife's perspective, your husband's going to the bishop all the time. What's going on? Is there something he's not telling me? Yeah.
And so...
What did you fear?
Oh, alcohol, porn.
Infidelity.
Infidelity, that was huge. What's he not telling me? Why does he need to go? But to be honest, like looking back at it, I actually handled it pretty well. I don't know, Josh, in all honesty, you can say what you want to say, but
I was persecuted.
I never...
I'm just kidding. She was great. She was great about the whole thing.
I never really questioned it, did I?
No, you did. Well, no.
Not the bishop interviews.
No, you didn't.
No.
And I think because you thought, well, if he's meeting with the bishop, right, he's doing the right things.
Yes,
you're thinking the right things.
I just wanted to trust him. And
yeah, and our bishop, an incredible man. Like, just there's all different kinds, but this guy is down to earth, just salt of the earth kind of person. That was just, I think you couldn't imagine somebody else better to help through a transition, even though he wasn't there obviously telling me, Josh, you're making the right things, but he's like, I get it, you're questioning, But what really was a struggle is his response was, Josh, you just need to read these scriptures. You just need to pray about these things. And I'm like, well, Bishop, I've already done that. I've done that for years, and it's not helping. What about this and this and this? And he's like, well, I didn't know about any of that. And so I did. I tried. I went to the bishop for years, for a full year, trying to figure that out. Because at the time, my son Cohen was going to be baptized, and I wrestled with the fact that I didn't believe in the church. And I wanted to be open and honest about that.
That spoke character to me as well. And it spoke in volumes, because if your husband is he's trying to, he's being true to himself in analyzing whether or not he is going to baptize your son. I mean, that tells you that he's got his best interest at heart, because he's trying to make the right decision, and he's trying to be honest with himself and with the church. And he doesn't want to take advantage of that authority, because you hear about people that go drink one weekend and then the next day they're in church taking the sacrament. Josh is not the type of person who's going to go drink one weekend and then be in sacrament meeting the next day taking sacrament. He's very honest that way. And he's a very logical thinker. And so for him, he took this very serious. So I could see his intentions, and I could see that he had the best interest at heart. So I had faith in that. And that was playing into his favor as well, in our favor, I guess.
Yeah. So I did. I mean, at the time I made the decision, with the bishop that I would go through with the baptism. He knew all the issues that I had with the church, but he was still, Josh, I think you should still do it if you want to do it. And so I did. And I was really hoping for some profound spiritual experience when I baptized my son, but I didn't have one. I'd seen family, friends, brothers go through baptisms and be in tears, and I just didn't feel it. And in fact, I even asked my son, I'm like, well, maybe it's me, maybe it's, and I said, well, how do you feel? And he goes, no, I feel the same. And I almost wonder if we indoctrinate kids into this idea that they're supposed to feel something amazing, and then they're like, oh yeah, I felt cool, but because he was like, I don't feel anything. And I thought, well, that's one more thing for me that I can't make it work. And at the time our baby was born, or about to be born.
It was like 2 weeks prior.
2 weeks prior, I was sitting on the porch. It was a nice day outside, just sitting on the back deck. And Brooke comes out and she's like, how are you doing? And I'm like, have you ever read the CS letter? And, she's like, no. And I said, look, here are some issues that I can't get around. And I said, I just don't believe in the church anymore. And that was the first time I vocalized that, even though I'd felt that way for a long time. And I remember Brooke's response, just looking at me like, well, you're not going to leave the church, right? Like, there's too many good things that it has to offer. You would never leave the church. And I could not respond. I just sat there in silence because deep down I knew that I couldn't continue to participate in the way that I had before. I knew, again, to the unspoken rule that we were Mormon. That's what it's kind of the unspoken agreement when we were married, that we were going to be Mormon. And now I'd broken that, and I couldn't sit on the fence anymore. Sitting on the fence is a terrible place. And I know a lot of people do it out of necessity. They do it because it's the same situation, out of fear of rejection from their family or their spouse or their children. I understand that. I did that for years. But if anyone's listening that is going through a similar thing, I would not be where I'm at today if I've not communicated to my spouse the way I felt.
Okay. Totally.
Okay.
Keep going.
Yeah. And so, for me, it was a breath of fresh air. It was a relief to get that off my chest. I wasn't ready for the reaction, hers was because we had talked about concerns here and there. And I thought maybe she's like, okay, Josh, I get it. If you don't want to go to church, that's fine. But at that first time, it really dawned on me that maybe our marriage won't survive this. Like maybe she will dig her heels in and decide that she wants to be a member of the church no matter what, and that's going to be her life. And that was terrifying.
Another option you had was just to stay silent and just play along and just stay active and just do what you could to just not disrupt.
Right.
Some might even say it would be an act of selflessness to stay silent, and it might be an act of selfishness to, your wife's having all these babies, you had a stillborn. Like, what was it like to stay silent, and why didn't you just keep staying silent?
Yeah, it's a great question. I did stay silent for years. And
what was that like, to stay silent for years?
It was terrible. It was terrible because I felt like I believed one way and my spouse felt another way. And I was being judged. I felt like I was being judged by friends, family, and my spouse. And like we talked about this, I think there was this underlying feeling that she thought that I was committing adultery, or that, I was off drinking or whatever. And that's the reason I had these doubts. And for me, that was the toughest part, was like, our relationship is suffering because of these issues. And that's what's so frustrating. And that's still frustrating today. And we'll talk a bit about later as it continues on down this path. But one would hope that somebody would know you well enough, know your intentions, know your integrity, that they would hear you out. And I knew that we had a good enough relationship that at the point where and you want to talk about confirmation, people say they have confirmation of the church or whatever, and they have a feeling. And that was another thing, as I kept relying on this feeling. And to go back to one of my you mentioned spiritual experiences as a child. If you want to say a spiritual experience in the sense of Mormonism, where you feel this warmth, you feel this, confirmation, the strongest experience I ever had like that in my life was at a Baptist church, at a youth program with a friend. And it was a preacher up talking about repentance, and he was talking about grace. He was talking about grace from the Savior. And I felt, just an overwhelming sense of love, and just felt, what we call a spiritual experience in the church. And I'm like, and that was for me, if you can have a spiritual experience here or anywhere else, then it's not like the church owns spiritual experiences. And I think that was Brooke's point in the Heavens for Real, is that it's arrogant of us to believe, or members or any religion, that they're the only ones that have communication with a higher being.
So it was just too painful to stay silent.
It was, yeah, and so it was too painful. I knew I couldn't sit on the fence. I couldn't raise my kid. I couldn't look my kid in the face and say, "Yeah, I believe in Joseph Smith." And for me, it came down to that. I'm like, I'm not going to teach my kid. He's got to know where I stand. And even then, when you start to take a step back and you don't believe in the church anymore, you question everything, right? And so now you look at a lens of, this might be the only life I have. This might be the only experience I have. I'm not going to live it in fear, and I'm not going to live it based on fear. And I have to rely on the relationship that Brooke and I have to get to a better spot. And that's the conclusion I made. It was better to be open and communicate than to sit silent.
Couple comments from those listening. Melissa writes, the fence is a horrible place. Thanks for sharing, Melissa. Let's see. Joyce writes, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. I've heard that before.
Very true.
Heather writes, you guys are literally word for word telling mine and my husband's story. Every single thing. Stillborn daughter at the same time. All of it.
Wow. My heart goes out to you.
Thank you,
I would
Heather.
hug you right now if I could.
Heather, Brooke, you guys have a hug in store. Thank you for sharing, Heather. Wyatt writes, following the resolve of my faith crisis, my sister-in-law said it best, it's like being the only sober person in the room. Mm-hmm. That's how Wyatt expresses it. Chris says, this interview is resonating with me so hard. Mindy says, brave. So what was it like for you with him telling you he didn't believe the church is true anymore, and talking about the CES letter? How'd that feel?
Putting myself back in that situation that day, when he was speaking to me, of course, you owe it to your spouse to hear them out. And you owe it to your spouse to consider, that maybe they have a valid point. But at the same time, I'm listening to him, and my thoughts, like while I'm trying to listen to, because he brought the information he was bringing to me was not just like, small pieces of information here and there. This is like a load of information he's dropping. And I'm kind of thinking, wow, this is really happening. I'm one of those people. I'm not, because, I think people kind of had this persona, or we gave off a persona that we were the perfect family to some sense. We had it all together. We were strong in the church. We were happy. And, we were happy for a long time. But just like any happy person would, they doubt things sometimes. And, we're all navigating our own faith the best way we can. So at that point and in that moment, I'm kind of like, wow, this is really happening. After Josh's and my discussion, I ran to my room, and I always like to pray in my closet. Ran to my closet. I hit my knees fast, and I prayed hard. And I just asked Heavenly Father that everything would work out. And it seemed as though my prayers at that point in time from then on were very repetitive because I was praying so hard. It was almost though like I had one moment where I was praying one day and I felt as though I had confirmation to just have faith, really, regardless.
In what?
In a sense that
Things work out?
Yes, and it may not work out the way I want it to, but to just have faith. And
in the process.
Yeah. And so, I guess moving forward, I had really bad anxiety over the whole thing, regardless of the confirmation that I'd received in my prayers. I was getting some bad anxiety. I decided to maybe look online on some mixed faith marriages and see what I could find there. See if I could find some peace, some advice that would help me and Josh. And at this point in time, I so wish I knew about podcasting. I didn't even know about podcasting at this point. At this point, I wish I knew about Mormon Stories. I wish I knew about John Dehlin. I wish that he offered mixed faith marriage podcasts. And I couldn't find anything. There's nothing out there on the internet that I could find. And it was so heart-wrenching to me that I couldn't find anything. I mean, we're in the world of information. I mean, we're born in a time in the informational era where we have access at our fingertips to pretty much anything. And yet I couldn't find any information as to how I need to deal with this situation at hand. So that was really hard for me too. To find that I mean, you hear about those people all the time where they take their kids to church for years on end. And, I felt like I had been pulling the wagon for so long. I was getting to the point now where I felt like I couldn't keep pulling anymore. It was just getting too hard to pull. And, but at that point in time, I just felt like I needed to still be strong. And what...
Can I jump in and ask a question?
Yeah.
So, 2015, I was excommunicated. Kate Kelly was excommunicated in 2014. Those are international news stories. And I only say that because it's kind of hard for me to imagine living along the Wasatch Front. It was in the Salt Lake Tribune, it was at the Deseret News. It's kind of hard for me to imagine that you would not have heard of Mormon Stories or, CES Letter or Mormon Think or any of those things. But I know that most Mormons have it. The overwhelming majority of Mormons still have it. So can you explain to me your best retrospective on how you could have not known about those things? Mormon Stories has been around since 2005. I'm just curious so we can shed light on that.
I think that living in an Orthodox Mormon world, the pressures are to study your scriptures. At this point, I'm still reading my scriptures every morning and every night. To be honest, I had so much desire to read. I mean, I hate to read. Let's be honest. If we're being honest, I hate to read. I didn't want to read anything. But if I got to the point where I knew I had to read my scriptures every morning and night, I was getting really kind of sick of reading my scriptures every morning and night because it was getting very redundant. I wasn't reading anything different that I hadn't already known. It was just kind of getting old to me. But I guess the reason why I was getting kind of fed up with it was, and I was kind of yearning for something more. And I was even looking to maybe read a book by Thomas S. Monson or just really anything, but as a stay-at-home wife and as a mom, the time that I had, I was giving it to my scriptures. I didn't have any more time to give to other means of source of knowledge.
Yeah, and I think that's true for most people. At least my experience was with Brooke. I would say, look. In fact, I found Mormon Stories by looking for mixed faith marriages, and in the Mormon community, and that's how I found Mormon Stories. And I remember, and Fair Mormon, I would come to Brooke and say, hey, Brooke, here's some issues. Here's Fair Mormon. Here's Mormon Think. Here's these podcasts, and it was almost an immediate. That's anti-Mormon. Like people in the church, even in family members that we tell them, they say, well, I don't want to read that stuff. It's bad. Right. And you're like, what do you mean it's bad? People have been so conditioned to not think for themselves, to be told how they think, how they act, and what they believe. And you're built into that, and what law is there? Like, and this was, and we can get into this a bit later with Spencer's approach, why it was so refreshing. But it was, no, you need to learn as much as you can from the best books, period. You need to go out and research, and because you're not going to find your own testimony of whatever that is, whether it's in or out of the church, unless you do your own research. But I think that's the initial reaction Brooke had was, oh, Josh, that's anti-Mormon stuff.
Yeah,
I'm not
and the
going to
wall
look at
goes
that.
up. The wall just comes right up. And I see it now that I'm out. For instance, I had a little get together with my friends just a couple weeks ago, and the one friend that I expected to understand the most, she'd served a mission. None of my other friends there had served a mission. And it was obvious at that point, I had told them that we were leaving the church that night, and that I kind of just like dropped the bomb on them all. And we go way back. These friends, they are my friends from 7th grade, and we have been through everything together. And this friend that's, served a mission says to me, well, I mean, you asked, didn't you? And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you prayed about it, right? That's what it's all about. And I said, oh, I prayed about it my whole life. And she said, well, did you receive an answer? I said, I received answers my whole life. And she goes, so you've had a confirmation you prayed about it, and that's all you need? And I said, no, actually, no. And then when I started explaining myself, she literally couldn't handle it. She walked right out of the room. She couldn't handle it. And I thought that, as a returned missionary, she would be the one who would understand the most. And, they should be taught to confront these issues. They should know this material before they're sent out on missions, but yet they're taught in secrecy. I mean, they're taught everything but what they should be taught. Yeah.
And this is when we get to we'll get to the Spencer Fluhman stuff very soon, but the fact that there's so much, in spite of the Maxwell Institute, in spite of Mormon Stories, in spite of CES Letter, in spite of Fair Mormon, in spite of the essays, enough is not being done to make the essays aware and available. We have surveys of bishops who have never heard of the essays, let alone read them. Like possibly a majority of bishops still don't know the essays exist, nor have they read them. Most Mormons don't know about, Fair Mormon. And of course, not only do they not know about Mormon Stories and CES Letter and Mormon Think and podcasts, but if they do know about them, they're immediately warned and guarded against them. So the church is putting up these massive firewalls to prevent, even the essays, it's been acknowledged that the church intentionally did not promote and share the essays in a very, in the way that they would, defend themselves against a Book of Mormon musical, right? Like they had a big Broadway, they actually rent, Times Square, space, advertisements in the Book of Mormon brochure to combat the Book of Mormon musical, but they have not done anything near that to promote the essays and the awareness, and they've excommunicated and hidden and silenced anyone who's spoken. So one of the reasons why we're going to be talking about Spencer Fluhman and the Maxwell Institute is because, not only what Spencer and what he's teaching isn't widely enough shared, but just these issues aren't widely enough shared. And that's a problem because it leads people like you guys to, and specifically you, Josh, but eventually you, Brooke, to be sort of hung out to dry.
Well, and can I add to that, John?
Yeah, please.
I am a firm believer that, they boast about being open, and they talk about disclosing this information, and they're all about talking about it with your kids. And I mean, they say these things, right? And even in Sunday school, I want to say shortly after we left the church, we overheard that they had a huge talk in gospel doctrine about how you shouldn't hold back from the knowledge that you're taught, but make sure you read the good things and not the bad things. Well, if you really want to be open and you really want your members to know what they're investing in, I honestly do not believe that they're encouraging us to know more until they speak it from the pulpit. Until we see these, the general authorities and the apostles speak these things from the pulpit and address these issues from there. Because to be honest, not once have you ever seen them get up to those pulpits and talk openly about these issues.
Yeah. Really quickly, just a couple things we're reading from listeners. Kelly writes, I'm in Texas, but nobody I know in Utah, California, or Texas knows anything about the CES letter, Mormon Stories Podcast, or any of the history. As Mormons, we live in a bubble. It's crazy to know what I know now and think I didn't know any of this 6 months ago, any of it. In 2018, right? The majority of educated Mormons in the United States still don't know about any of these issues, including Mormon Stories Podcast. Yeah. Or the Maxwell Institute, or Fair Mormon. Yep. So something is not happening. For everyone's good intentions, something's not happening.
Well, I think we talked a bit about this before, it is very difficult in the information age to not run into these things. And I think what people do is they bury their head in the sand. It's like being in your home and there's a war going on, there's bombs firing everywhere, and you're convincing yourself that you don't want to hear the bombs. Because this has been our experience, when we've brought these things to friends, family, the majority is they say that's anti-Mormon, so they won't look at it. Or two, they say, I'm happy where I'm at. I even had somebody say to me, I don't want to know what you know. They flat out said it, because I'm happy where I'm at. I don't want to know what you know.
Or you can't tell me anything that I don't already know. How conceited is that?
Yeah, and then you tell them something, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't know about that."
In fact, I said to somebody, "What about polyandry?" And they said, "Who's that?"
Who's that? A couple other things. So Noreen writes, they're playing sort of a double agent game. Maggie writes, my grandson in Salt Lake City on a mission has not heard of the CES letter. Nicole writes, they say only expect what's been said on the Mormon pulpit. Everything else is of the devil. They teach. Noreen writes, the essays are a damage limitation exercise to imply openness and honesty, but aren't exposed to general scrutiny for the reasons you're speaking about. Ashley writes, if it's between ruining your marriage or sitting on the fence, isn't it better just to play along? How do you just follow what you believe if it goes against all the things you promised your spouse, your life would be with them so hard? And again, I think Ashley's speaking to just one of the reasons why people don't want to talk about this. Spencer writes, we need Mormon Stories pass-along cards. I agree. We need a Mormon Stories podcast and a CES letter podcast, CES letter billboard. We need to actually raise money to put billboards up along the Wasatch Front to make this stuff more known. And then finally, someone writes, Matt writes, Mormon Stories needs better search engine optimization. And you can be dang sure the LDS Church and the More Good Foundation and, Fair Mormon have money from deep-pocketed individuals to advertise and to make sure that Google shows their content before Mormon Stories and before anything else. So if there's any Mormon Stories, Open Stories Foundation supporters out there that would want to contribute to a campaign to purchase a billboard or space on a billboard or advertising for ZS Letter, we would help coordinate that, because we agree that this needs to be more available. But just to kind of close this segment, because I think it's time to move to Spencer's, talk just briefly about what pain this caused for you individually, Josh, for your marriage, for you to have so much ignorance out there.
So let me just hurry and say this. So upon Josh coming to me with all this information, I guess my next move was to do the first thing that I was taught not, or to go with the first thing that I was taught to do, and that was to not look into anti-Mormon doctrine. So not look into what he's been looking into. Instead, I think, okay, I have a loving mother and a loving father and brothers and sisters, 8 or 6 brothers that have gone on missions. They're knowledgeable enough. They should be able to answer some of these questions. So Josh relays some of the information to me, and yes, he's got valid points. And then, of course, when I go to them and I relay this information to them and I ask their opinions and I want their input as to what I should do, they can't give me answers. The only thing, in fact, I had a good friend that told me, this was really hurtful, and if my anxiety wasn't bad enough, this just kind of added to it. She says to me, well, Brooke, there's got to be something else going on. There's something he's not telling you. Whether it be adultery or porn, or whether it be ulterior motives behind the scenes, you've got to figure out what's going on. And then, of course, one day I'm walking down the street and I'm strolling my daughter in her, my brand new baby daughter in her stroller. I literally had a neighbor come out and chase me. She must have caught wind of what was going on. And she says to me, we went to dinner the other night with this guy who receives letters on behalf of the church. And he tells me that you wouldn't believe how many husband or mothers wives write in to the church saying, my husband looked into anti-Mormon doctrine and now he's cheating on me and we're getting in a divorce. So literally, like, you're being conditioned, John. And I mean, literally conditioned, brainwashed from a very young age. I've been told horror stories like this. So, of course, I'm going to therapy at this point. I'm having serious anxiety, and this anxiety is creeping into depression now. I'm at a place where I've worked so hard to have this baby. My family's complete, and I don't want to be here anymore. I just want to die. And I am in the depths of despair, and I don't have my family there.
Because they're what?
I mean, I want to say they were trying to help, but unknowingly to them, they had rightful intentions, and their heart went out to me, but they were all telling me everything that would give me information against what I needed to hear. Thank goodness we were going to a therapist who was a non-LDS therapist. And we went to him one day and we walked away, and I just felt like I could finally breathe again. He had given me some really great information and advice.
What are types of responses that aren't useful? What were some of the information you were being given that wasn't helpful?
There's something else going on that you need to know.
Okay.
I can't answer these things for the church, but I know the church is true. And it's funny because now that I'm out of it, the things that people say that they're in it unknowingly, they don't realize how dumb, and I don't want to be mean, but they don't realize how ridiculous it sounds. And it's like, oh yeah, I can't answer your questions, but I know the church is true, and your husband is wrong, and he just wants to drink. Everybody, because Josh, he works in a very social atmosphere, and it sells, and you can bond upon drinking, and he's surrounded a lot by it. So of course they're just assuming that he wants to drink, and he's making compromised decisions. And then they're starting to think, well, Brooke wants to drink coffee though, because she's having health issues and the doctors are telling her to drink coffee. And so there's that aspect of it. And then there's the laziness aspect, that we're lazy, or that we're just, that's the easy way out for me, to just believe my husband or save my marriage. Those accusations are being thrown out there as well. So I think that's kind of what happened. We had a friend who lived in the neighborhood, and they had left the church 8 years prior to us. And we had always been upon moving in, they left right a little bit prior to us moving into the neighborhood in South Jordan. And we had always kind of known, we'd heard about these people, and people would say stuff like almost frowning down on them. Oh, they left the church. He was so smart. He had all the questions, and everybody was so shocked when he left. And then she left because she was just following him. And and now they do this and they do this, and they're so bad. Not necessarily they're so bad, but they just kind of talked down about them and were kind of frowned about in the neighborhood.
And wild stories.
Yes.
Wild stories about who they were as people after they left the church, things they were into, which were all completely false. So it's amazing how people...
What?
They said they were swingers. They said that, the story is that, in fact, when we first moved in 5 years ago, that's what people would tell us. Hey, don't worry about them. They used to be really active. In fact, it was crazy because he was the gospel doctrine teacher and was really smart, but now they've left the church and now they're anti, and, they're into all kinds of crazy stuff like swinging, key parties. And we were like, all right, we didn't really think of anything, because anytime we met them on the sidewalk or walking down the street, we're like, oh, these people are really nice, really down to earth.
And I thought, oh gosh, me and Rachel would get along really well if it weren't, it's really unfortunate if it weren't considering our religious differences. And which is so messed up. Who's to say you can't have a good relationship, and that religious differences have to separate that, And I think that lots of speculation gets thrown in once you leave. People just assume. And we're struggling here still. We have so many family members, and there's huge wedges that are being that are dividing us as a family. Our relationships are being inflicted upon. We're being separated, just because I feel like, it's because the church, I don't know. They kind of condition people to think a certain way that when stuff like this happens, you're frowned upon. But anyways, so moving on, Rachel, this is where I'm just at a really low point.
Suicidal, or?
Yeah, I would never kill myself, but
you were wanting to die.
I wanted to die.
And really quick, Josh, what was it like? How was she treating you? What was it like to be in that space, for you?
I was just trying to be patient.
Was it straining your marriage?
For sure.
How?
We didn't talk as much. She would always, if she saw me watching a podcast, it was always like I was doing something wrong. I felt like when she'd walk in and I was watching, it was like Josh is digging into anti-Mormon literature again. He's just going at it. And I would bring things up to her like, hey, Brooke, did you hear about, the blood oath? No. Well, this is what it is. Isn't that crazy? And everything I would tell her, it was almost an automatic response of, that's not true. None of that's true.
Yeah.
And that was part of the transition for me. So for me, it was, okay, I get it. I'm changing the game here. I'm changing the rules of our marriage because we entered this agreement. And just one quick side note, for anyone that's going through similar things, and therapy was immensely helpful because it began to help Brooke see things from a different point of view. She was raised in Utah, the Utah bubble. She didn't have a perspective. She didn't know anybody respectable that wasn't LDS.
And
right?
It helped me cope with my anxiety. So after our therapy, once I actually talked to people that related to me, my anxiety actually got worse. So that's when I first addressed the issue at hand, that what I was doing was not helping the situation, that I needed to talk to somebody who understood me more. And I knew my friend down the street, Rachel, that she had gone through a very similar experience. Her husband left and she followed. She was the only one that I had known that had gone through the experience. So I texted Rachel one day. I knew Josh was going to be out of town. So I figured this would be a good time for me and Rachel to have a one-on-one conversation. I did this because I was desperate. I had people specifically telling me not to go to her and talk to her. And I felt like at this point I didn't have a choice, because it was either this or things were going to get really bad. So,
and that's just, we've already kind of touched on it, but that's just another issue, is that when people, you know, we've said in the past, and I got this quote from Thomas McConkie, a cult is a religion, any institution that won't let you leave with your dignity intact. So in these communities, in these families, when somebody has genuine doubts and concerns, or if they just decide they don't believe it anymore, they're not just respected and said, bless you, going your way. They're not only gossiped about, but everyone's warned not to go to them, and lies are smeared about them, to the point where they're making everyone who's still a believer fear against getting the information. So it really does function like a cult in that way. Just like Scientology labels someone as a suppressive person and forbids its members to talk. Maybe it's not as formal, maybe we don't have a name for it, but we kind of do. It's apostate, you know, it's all sorts of things that we label, but it's a really insidious thing that we do in our culture, and it has to stop.
yeah.
Yeah. So you talked to her anyway.
Yeah. I invited Rachel over.
Shout out to Rachel.
Yeah. Love you, Rach. She's not watching, but she will be tonight. She'll watch it tonight. Her husband's on board though. Hi, guy. Anyways, I invite Rachel over. Josh is coming in from a late flight later that night. So me and Rachel are talking. And me and Rachel's story is like very parallel. And her story's resonating with me. And as she's talking to me, I can feel the tension and the anxiety release like immensely. And I'm starting to see things differently, and I'm feeling relieved, huge amounts of relief. And then sure enough, you know, like 3 hours later, we're still talking. And Rachel's just so sweet, and she's consoling me and just listening to me and giving me advice, and she understands me and she gets me. Nobody else could understand me. Nobody understood where I was coming from, and she did for the first time. And sure enough, before we know it, Josh gets home, and Rachel's still there. And, you know, Josh walks in, and then this becomes a third-party conversation. And Josh, me, and Rachel are talking, but it kind of turns into like a Josh and Rachel conversation, and I'm just listening. And Josh has information about the church, and Rachel has information about the church, and they're kind of going back and forth. But the thing is, they're finishing each other's sentences. It's not like they've been studying together. It's not like they have been passing information along, or they've had this conversation before. This is similar information they both had. And these were true facts about the church. And Josh had his epitome moment where he realized the church is true. And this was my moment. And this moment is where everything had changed. I'm sitting here listening to them talk back and forth. I'm hearing facts about the church that I've never heard in my life. I'm hearing them finish each other's sentences. And they're going on for probably about 45 minutes to an hour. And as they're talking about these things, everything starts to make sense. You have this wall that you build, and this wall has bricks, and each brick has a representation of a subject, like blacks in the priesthood, and one is about the word of wisdom, and then one's your relationships with your families. And I'm sitting here and I'm watching my wall crumble. I'm starting to realize the church is not true, and all these questions I've had my whole entire life that have built up, it's finally making sense. There's no answers to these questions because the church is not true. It was like Santa Claus. It was clear as daylight. And this was my epitome moment. And the only way I can describe this is I had an out-of-body experience. I felt like I was completely out of my body, and it was so surreal. In this moment, I had more clarity and more resignation that in this moment that I've ever had in my entire life. Not only did it make sense in my heart, but it made sense in my mind. And if we're talking about a confirmation of the Spirit, this is the confirmation of the Spirit that stood out to me more prevalently than it's ever stood out to me in my entire life. And I come to realize that the church is not true. And I've had a lot of spiritual experiences. But when people say to me, I've had a profound spiritual experience, the church is not true. And I'm like, well, I've had a very profound spiritual experience. Or that the church is not true. They feel the church, they've had lots of profound experiences. The church is true, but this is my experience. And this was an out of body experience that, I can't even begin to describe the realness of it because it resonated with me. And it was like, I want to say on one of your podcasts, somebody talked about, it's almost like if you had your testimony outside and it was just a pile of jelly and you could poke it and you could prod it. And I think that that's kind of a fair way to explain it, but I literally just did not feel like I was in my body at this point in time.
Anything else, Josh, you or either of you want to say before we start the part about Spencer and the Maxwell Institute?
No, I think the point through the whole transition was, and it was over years, was that it just took patience on both sides. I think I had to understand Brooke from where she was coming from, and she eventually, and kudos to Brooke, she took the leap of faith and was like, I'm going to believe in our marriage and I'm going to listen to what Josh has to say. She made the call to Rachel. I didn't. So I think there were a few things that really helped us. One was an outside perspective from a therapist. Like I chuckle when people tell me that they're going to go see their bishop for marriage counseling because their bishop is a plumber or whatever. Therapist. He's not a licensed therapist. Go see someone who's going to give you a third-party view that's non-biased, as non-biased as they can be, and have patience and be true to yourself because at the end of the day, like someone mentioned, sitting on the fence is a terrible place to be. And the longer you're there, the more depressed you're going to get. And then things will never get better in either direction.
There's actually a study that's been going around the internet. I haven't confirmed it, but it basically associates depression with staying in a religion you no longer believe in. Mm-hmm. Maybe we can get a link to that. I'm going to go ahead and read what Victoria writes, just as a way to kind of close this section. She writes, "This is so sad. I also had a faith crisis and left the church recently. There have been times when I've never felt so alone in this process. I lost my sense of meaning and I've also felt suicidal. The whole time I never drank alcohol, never had sex, didn't smoke, didn't take drugs, and I lived the Sabbath. I still live the same way even though I've now removed my records from the church. So the idea that people leave because they want to break the commandments is false. Even if people do change their lifestyle, it makes no difference to a person's worth or value. We are all expressions of God regardless of how we live. It is the content of our heart that is important. I still feel alone, and I'm so thankful for this channel. I hope you both know that you are not alone and your courage brings strength to others. Thank you. I greatly appreciate your effort to help people who are suffering alone.
Well said.
That's from
Thank
Victoria.
you, Victoria.
Thank you.
John, can I just add one more thing?
Please.
So, like the next morning after my epitome moment, I wake up and I wanted to pinch myself, because you're thinking at this point, oh, wow, the church isn't true. Is this really happening? Your whole life you've been indoctrinated. And along my post-faith journey, I had discussed to myself, and just kind of to Victoria's point, depression. You think depression's bad before, it's bad now. And the core of what hurts the most about leaving the church is the simple fact that it's not true. Your wall is now completely torn down, and you have to figure out, our family's forever. Is there life after death? It's the core of the issues that hurt the worst. And then, it's the after effect of what I'm starting to realize at this point, what my husband's had to go through on his own. That he's had to do this by himself, and the pain that I inflicted upon him, and the guilt that was placed on me for doing that. And then I felt ashamed, disgusted at where I was at, that I was actually making the choice to be true to myself and leave the church. Ashamed, that I would have to tell my family and break the news to my family that I had to be true to myself. And just like Tom Phillips says, integrity is what the church taught you, and integrity is what brings you away from the church. So.
Yeah. And so, letter
Yes.
to those who support Mormon Stories and the Open Stories Foundation.
Yes.
To the courageous people that got the essays out there inside the church and outside. To the therapists everywhere who are willing to support, because these are all instrumental parts of the process.
Yeah.
To your friend, your former missionary companion or friend.
Yeah, friend.
Cousins, brothers, just anyone. I think that's a decent way to end. Speak up. If you don't speak up, if you don't speak out, you leave individuals, couples, families to suffer. Divorce, suicide, suicidality, fracturing of families. So speak out. Speak out on your Facebook walls. Speak out on Twitter, Instagram. Write emails, write letters. If you know better, if you know the truth about the church, and that doesn't mean you have to not believe it, right? You can still believe the church is true, but speak up in your gospel doctrine class or in testimony meetings or at sacrament meeting. Speak up about the truth and let everybody know what the truth is about the church's history, its doctrine, its problems, its challenges, because it will provide cover for so many people who are going to be suffering in silence anyway.
Absolutely.